If you're thinking about getting a 4-cycle trimmer because you don't want to mix oil and gasoline anymore, then why not start by getting an older unit first before committing to buying a new one for close to $300. For a lot less, you could get something like this, which is about 15 years old, but more than likely has spent most of that time sitting in storage and not being used. However, there's an issue. If you don't put the effort into maintaining it either, the same thing's going to happen to yours. In today's video, we're going to look at this Troy-Bilt branded string trimmer, and the problem is that I have zero ideas as to what's going on with it. I really do think my friends enjoy just giving me things to work on and telling me they have no information about it, because that way they don't get blamed later on when I find out what's going on with it. Now, it's just a theory, but it sure works in their favor. Now, I'm going to try and repair this string trimmer, but yours might be a little different, so this might not work on yours. So if things are not working out for you, like in this video, please ask about it, and I'll be glad to answer your questions. I'm not really sure what's going on with the fuel lines, but whoever did this was feeling rather generous that day, or just lazy. Now, for those of you who don't know, this is a 4-cycle trimmer, which means you don't have to mix your oil and gasoline, but you do have to put oil in the engine the first time you get it out of the box, and something most people forget to do is to check it once in a while and then replace it. You'll see what happens here later on when you forget to do that part. As you can see, I'm looking around the trimmer trying to find all the stickers and labels I can. That way I can find all the information I can about it online, making sure that I know what I'm getting myself into. It's also important because sometimes these 4-cycle trimmers have very specific starting instructions that can differ from your typical trimmer. So if you're used to doing it one way for the last decade, this different way of starting it can throw you off. Fortunately, this one came with fuel in the tank, and even though I'm not sure how old it is, I can smell it and it certainly seems fresh. So right before I started filming this portion of the video, I filmed the intro video for this trimmer, and that's when I noticed that the fuel lines were backwards on it. Now, it's hard to tell if you don't know which port does what on the carb, but I'll show you how I figured that out here in a bit once we figure out just how bad this trimmer really is. But for right now, I'm going to trim the long fuel line and swap them on the carb. I'll then press the bulb a few times and you should see fuel coming out of one of the fuel lines and back into the tank, which it does. The next item I want to check is the most important one on this entire machine, which is the oil level. Now, the owner's manual can be found online for this one, and the instructions say to remove the dipstick, wipe it clean, and then insert it all the way back into the engine. But what happens if you only press the dipstick back into the engine instead of doing what it says? Well, it turns out it still shows that we have oil, it just appears to be low. But if we instead thread it back into the engine and take it back out, how much more oil is it going to show on the dipstick? Well, it turns out not much more. Now, there's definitely a bit more on it than the first reading, but it still shows that it's quite low. Now, since we know there's some oil in it, I think it's time to try and start it and see what it does or doesn't do. Well, surprisingly, it started and ran just like it's supposed to. Now, for those of you who didn't know, these little 4-cycle engines need to warm up quite a bit before using them, so I did do that. I just didn't bother showing it running for those minutes. Now, at this point, we have a few choices we need to make. We can either take the time to take the carb apart and inspect it, or we can just do what we need to do. Now, I'm all in for doing extra work, but to be honest, you could cause more issues if you're not careful. In this situation, I think it's best to do the maintenance and inspect and replace the fuel lines, and that's it. Now, I know some of you who are watching might be saying, hey, since you've got it there, you might as well do everything you need to it and then charge them for all the extra work. Now, even though I could do that, I don't think they would appreciate knowing I did extra work they might not have needed and charged them for it. Now, if I saw something I didn't like or an issue that I was going to have later on, I might do something about it then, but for right now, I simply don't feel as though I need to. However, I do want to give it a quick cleaning only because it's pretty gross to handle, especially the lower part of the engine. And besides that, it's always nice when they hand me an oily and dirty mess and I give them back a clean and, more importantly, a working machine. Now, this also works in my favor as well because if they have to give it back to me, I can then compare it to what it looked like when I gave it back to them. This will let me know just how it was treated after I gave it back to them. If there is oil all over it or worse, then I know they might have an issue with caring for it, and that more than likely is their MO, and knowing that will help me to deal with their issues with their machines. I know it sounds like I'm profiling them, but the way I look at it is that it helps me to understand the user, and the more I know about them, it'll help me to fix the machines they bring me. So take it for what it is, but in the end, it helps me out a lot more than when I didn't know anything about the user. As you can see, it's a lot better looking now than it was when we first got it, so hopefully they'll realize just how much better it looks, and maybe, just maybe, they'll take better care of it when handling it, but I doubt it though. The first item I want to fix that's kind of getting on my OCD is the shield at the trimmer head. It's loose and not helping the trimmer to stay on the table. It turns out they didn't even have it installed correctly, which I hate to say this happens a lot more than I care to mention. Now, there's only two ways to install it, and about 10 to 15% of the time it's done the wrong way. No, I shouldn't say the wrong way, let's say the more creative way. Now, after taking it off and then sliding the shield into the bracket the less creative way and tightening the wing nut, it's now very secure and also a lot less fun. So how did I figure out the fuel lines were backwards then? When I was looking at the gasoline in the tank, I noticed that the fuel filter was loose at the line. Now with this particular style of filter, the line needs to be right against the filter, otherwise it doesn't work well when filtering the gasoline. I then considered the idea that if they got this part wrong, they could have gotten the lines mixed up as well. When pulling on the return line, which is the one without the filter, I soon realized it was on the port on the carb that was meant for the line with the filter. If I press the bulb, the line that doesn't have the filter should have fuel spraying out of it, which it does now. Remember, I already switched the lines back to the correct orientation at the beginning, but if you look at the shorts video, you'll notice that it was backwards. The next item I want to take care of is to remove the old fuel lines from the tank and see if the fuel filter is still usable, and then start to install the new lines into the tank. Now, could I keep using these old lines? And the answer is yes. These are not in terrible shape, however, it's doubtful they'll stay that way for the next few years. Now, I do believe these are some good fuel lines, and even though they aren't brittle, these are cheap to replace. The filter is also cheap, but since this one is in great shape, aside from the discoloration on the metal parts, the filter itself looks to be very clean. Now, new filters are not expensive either, but if you buy more than one at a time, you'll get a better deal. So if you need to get one, ask someone else like a friend, a relative, or a neighbor if they need one as well, and that way you can order a pack of 5 filters, which will make each one very inexpensive. Now, to help get the new lines into the openings in the fuel tank, I would cut the ends at an angle, and the steeper the better. Also, using some long-nosed bent pliers will help out as well. You can find these at any auto parts store or at your local big box store. Now, it doesn't matter which opening you make the return line or the filter line, that's up to you. Now, the filter line won't need any work to it once in the tank, but you'll need to pull the filter line out so you can cut off the angle piece and then install the filter. Also, make sure there's plenty of fuel line in the tank, that way the filter can reach all the gasoline in the lowest part of the tank. Now, the fuel line I'm using when bought in bulk is about $1 a foot, so in this case I'm only spending about $1, and it's more for insurance than anything else. Now, I haven't decided if I'm going to replace the purge bulb just yet, so I'm not going to touch it. As you saw earlier, without the fuel line being against the filter, it can basically come apart. That's why it's so important that the line is right up against it. So when connecting the fuel lines to the carb, the filter line will connect to the port right next to the bulb, and the return line will connect to the one furthest away from the bulb. Now, this is not consistent between different carbs, so pay attention to how yours is supposed to be connected. Next, we're going to check the fuel flow through the lines. So when pressing the bulb, fuel should come up the filter line and then go through the carb, and then partially fill the bulb, and then leave through the return line and go back to the tank. Of course, with the carb already full of fuel, that was less dramatic than I was hoping for, but as you can see, it's flowing through the lines just like it should. If you get this part wrong, the engine will still start and run, but eventually it'll slow down and stop about 10 minutes after starting, and it won't start again. So it's important that you get the lines connected in the right way. After that, it's time to do an oil change, which more than likely has never been done to this trimmer in its lifetime. As you can see, the oil is very dark, which is not a good thing. If it's this bad, it probably means it hasn't been changed in a long time. Now, according to the manual and even on the sticker on the side of the engine, you only need about 3 ounces of oil for it, which seems to be a tiny amount. Now, I'm not going to tell you what you should do, but you almost have to wonder if that's enough oil to properly lubricate this engine for a long time, or if it's just long enough to lubricate it to last long enough to outlive the warranty. Either way, add the oil and then check to make sure that you have enough in it. After that, we'll then replace the trimmer line and then try using it. I know a lot of people like to use a speed feed head because you can easily load line into it, but this type of fixed line is even easier to load. Yes, you lose line each and every piece you have to replace, but you can't deny just how simple it is to reload, and if you're really sneaky, you don't even have to use trimmer line and maybe use something else. So as you can see, it starts and runs just like it should, and it works pretty well. Now you're not going to get the same kind of performance as a two-stroke, but if not mixing oil and gasoline is what you're looking for, this works out really well. Of course, with the way things are going right now, these will eventually go away and there's going to be nothing but batteries left. But as an alternative to two strokes, this was a somewhat okay effort. Now, this is not for everyone. Some won't like the way it starts, others won't like how heavy it is, but to be honest, if you can handle its quirks, it's not bad. For me, I think it's just too heavy for extended use. As for this one, it's now ready to go back to its owner. The one thing I will say is that I don't typically have to do extensive testing on them as I do with two strokes, mainly because of tuning and cold starts. These always start the same way after fixing. So what would I do if they gave me this one to have and use? Well, I gladly accept it and then promptly sell it. I don't like using it, I don't like its weight, and I don't need it. I'd rather take the money, so I'm going to sell it for cheap. You might say that's sort of mean to do, but they did give it to me to have, and yes, it might seem that way, but what I saw was that they didn't want it either and found a great way of getting rid of a mistake. Like I said, this type of trimmer is not for everyone. After getting it and using it, most find out a little too late that they've changed their mind about it. And I think that's why we find so many of them being given away, but who knows, this might be right for you, but it's certainly not right for me. So my question is, would you want to use a 4-cycle trimmer? Does it even appeal to you? I think you already know how I feel about it. Thank you for watching. I really do appreciate your time here. Please feel free to ask me any questions about this project or about your own projects, and I hope to see you in the next video.